All right. We're going to move on to use cases. So it's another class. Let me pull up that little flow chart thing that we were looking at. Here we go. This is where the use case lies. It's right here. It's in the next layer up from the entities. There's a saying I like that Bob uses. He says use cases control the dance of the entities. I love that. To me, that fully distills like what a use case does. It controls the dance of the entities. You know, it's going to be touching a lot of entities and moving things around. Use cases, they tend to be verbs. They tend to be actions. They're, you know, any button you click on in a UI is probably going to trigger a use case. Any input is probably going to trigger a use case. Anything the user does is going to trigger a use case. A little bit ago, Philip talked about model view controller patterns. This would kind of land in the controller. We do split controller out into its different thing. We have a slightly different definition of controller, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But controllers are more specific to the input device. So there's controllers for a mouse. There's controllers for touch. There's controllers for stylus. There's controllers for keyboards. We split those out a little. We isolate those a little bit further back, because when you're going to do the thing you do when you touch on a button is probably very similar to the thing you do when you click on a button. And it's very similar to maybe the keystroke that you're going to press to shortcut. So we isolate that a little bit. So anyways, let's focus on controllers. Or I'm sorry. We're going to focus on use cases. And we make a lot of use cases. So use cases, there's a lot of them in an application. And if you look into the use case folder, you should, when you're naming use cases, these tend to be, I would say about 80% of them tend to be functional use cases. And they should be named in a way that kind of like screams, what does it do? Here's an example. Set challenge. All right. I don't really know what a challenge, you guys might be like, I don't really know what a challenge is, but I'm guessing if I need to set a challenge, this is going to do it, right? Try, show, hotspot. That's a little more awkward. But clear, shown, hotspot. These are all use cases. And they tend to be, look at how long these are. They tend to be, for the most part, very single responsibility principles. So, if you guys know the acronym SOLID programming, if you don't, look it up. Big important thing. It's another Bob thing. But the S in solid programming is single responsibility. And so when you're building a use case and you're thinking about its responsibility, the first little trick you're going to run into is, what are you going to name your script? And this is a good test. If you can name that script, if you're like, I'm going to name this script, clear, shown, hotspot. That suggests that you know exactly the single responsibility of that. You've got a good idea. You're onto it. If you're naming your script something like something manager or something controller, that should suggest to you that maybe you're not doing a single responsibility. You have not boiled this thing down enough. If you cannot say, what does this script do, without using the word and or sometimes, or, then you don't really have it dialed yet. Think about it a little bit more and think, all right, let's think about single responsibility. All right, so let's jump over to the board, pick one of these guys. I looked at the board and I found we're going to try to get 3 done because they're each a little bit different. And I wanted to show a functional use case, which is this pick entity. Is that the one I wanted? No, this is the entity. That's what we were just working on. Set feedback. We're going to start with this one. Set pick feedback use case. So you guys remember in the previous thing, we were setting feedback, or we were in the entity, we were storing feedback. So if you click on this hotspot and it's a pick challenge, we give the user this feedback and say, that was right, or no, that's not right because it doesn't do whatever, right? The author can set feedback. Well, that set feedback, if we look at our diagram over here, that's going on. Let me zoom in a little bit, show you guys this. That's going on over here in our wireframe. This is the authoring inspector. As an author, I'm going to set it, this is the Anconius feedback, so that correlates to this hotspot. This is the quadriceps feedback, which correlates to this hotspot. As an author, as a teacher, I'm going to write these things in here to give the students some guidance, either positive or negative feedback on what they clicked and why that was right or why that was wrong. So anyways, this is input, right? Imagine that the author is typing. Every time they type, that character's getting submitted. We're getting an input change or whatever. That needs to be sent to a use case and handled. That's what we're doing. So let me jump back over to our document or our card, and we'll look at that. The card is right here. We can zoom out a little bit now. This use case will set the pick feedback string for a hotspot and then dispatch a state change. And we'll dive into what that means in a second. We have some limits. Limit the characters to 100. So they can only go up to 100 characters. So think of that. That's a test we're going to write. If the characters are above 100, we're going to return some feedback, like feedback is limited to 100 characters. So this is going to show up as a little validation message on the front end saying, all right, you can only do 100 characters, guys. Otherwise, we're going to return null. So here is our function. Here is our use case. All right, let's get going. We're going to call this set pick feedback. Oh, I spelled feedback wrong. We'll fix that. You guys are going to notice that I am a bad speller. All right, so let's get into that. Right here, we're going to do set pick feedback.ts. Again, right away, get your test. Set pick feedback test.ts. All right, we're getting set up right here. Let's close out a few of these other things. All right, close others. Did I spell that right? Something. Yep, I did not spell this right. There's a K at the end. All right. A couple notes. I have a nice function name that when you're looking through this, you can see, you get a pretty good idea of what's going to happen when you call this. Single responsibility seems pretty good. This is a function, so it's lowercase set pick feedback. So just you think about that when you're building this out. All right, let's look at this. This use case will set the pick feedback string. So let me just grab this signature because that's what's defined for us. And we're going to throw that right here. And let's just start with that. I need to fix my spelling error. And we're going to export this. And export set pick feedback. We've got it's the function. That one got me again. And let's just bracket it off. There we go. We got to return. Let's just get it running. Let's just get the compiler to be happy. Null. I'm just going to return null. All right, great. Now let's come over here and let's get our test going. I'm going to go ahead and stub in the function make test rig. Even though it's going to be empty right now for a second while we get this thing going. Describe. We're going to do, this is called the set pick feedback use case. All right. And what's our first test? Well, it sets the pick feedback for a hotspot. Let's do that one. It sets the pick feedback for a hotspot. All right. So, right away I can tell you, we're going to need a few things. We know this has to be set on an entity, on the pick challenge entity, because we wrote that, we know we got to store that here in our pick challenge right here, right? We're going to do this set feedback for hotspot. We got to do that. So we need to get a hold of this entity. So I know we're going to need our entity. We almost always need our entity. Context. Constant. Entity. We're going to say ENTIT entities equals make entity context. We're going to just start with that. So this is calling that entity context function that we built out that instantiates all of our main entities. So we're just going to start with that. And we know we're going to need that in our test. So let's go ahead. I actually like to do this little trick with spreading it. And it just makes life a little bit easier down here. So we got this constant equals make test rig. All right, so we start with that. And we're going to want, we know we're going to need to check and make sure the pick feedback got set. So we know we're going to need our pick challenge entity. Let's see, what else are we going to need? Well, let's just say, let's start with our function. We got our function here. We're going to do set pick feedback, and we're going to say hotspot ID, and we're going to say some feedback. All right, and we expect pick challenge dot feedback, get feedback for hotspot here to equal some feedback, right? That's what we expect to happen. Now, there's a number of ways we could do this. We could spy. I don't know if you guys are used to the, we could, you know, there's other ways we could do this. If you guys are used to a spy, that's kind of a fun way to do it. It's got a fun name, but you could do a spy. That is pick, no, it's a jest dot spy on, and that's going to be pick challenge. And the thing we're spying on is set, I always have to write it out first to get the name because they want you to do a string. Set feedback. Okay, we're going to do this. All right. This is a spy we could do. And then instead of this test, we could do expect spy to be called with these two things, hotspot ID and some feedback. That's one way we could do it. I think we're gonna stick with this other way because it's really testing, like, we know what we want it to do. You know, when we do that spy, it's kind of a little fancier, and we're just like, well, are we sure it's doing what we want it to do? So we're gonna just do this. This is what we expect to happen. We expect that you call this use case with hotspot ID, and at the end of the day, whatever happens, all the gears turn, and this comes back. Oops. Did I spell hotspot wrong? I think I did. Hold on one second. Edit. No. Let's go back to here. Pick challenge. Yep, look at that. Hot spit. Let's do this. All right. That should take care of that. All right, so let's go back to here. Now, oh, we got to get this test going. We're on the wrong test. So let's get we're going to grab this this test here. And this is what we're going to check. All right, and I'm expecting that to fail because, well, we don't have any code set up. So what are we going to do? We need to do, well, we know we need to do something like hotspot pick challenge. We need to set the feedback. But you notice we don't have any entities yet. How do we get a hold of the entities? Well, we could do this way. Entities, entity context. We can start with this. Let's just go ahead and start with this. And now we'll say entity. Let's go and do entities dot pick challenge dot set feedback for hotspot ID and feedback. There, easy. Now we got to bring. All right, so okay, now we got a problem here with entities, and this is we'll dive into this in a second. We're going to do this temporarily before I'm going to spread it. I'm also just going to return entities itself because I need that for my test. All right. So that should pass. I'm guessing that's going to pass. Okay. Now, let's take a moment and just do a quick refactor on this because we can see right now Well, you guys, once you run through the whole cycle a few times, you'll start to see, okay, this set pick feedback, it's going to be called by a React component. It's going to be called by whatever is running this input box. Every time it picks up a change, it's going to be sending this message. So this is going to live in the front end. And what you're going to find, and what we have found over time, is that requiring that front end component to keep track of the entities, to have that reference to the entity context, is a little annoying. We can get a little bit better. So what we're going to do is we're going to refactor this to be a factory generated function. This is a little more advanced as well. But we're going to change this, and you're going to see this pattern all the time. You'll see most of our things are a factory function, factory generated function. So let me show you what that means. What we're going to do is we're going to, instead of exporting the actual function, we're going to do export function make set pick feedback. And we're going to put the entities here. Just bear with me as we charge through this. And now this is going to return a function. We don't even have to name it, but we'll name it just to make it clear. We're going to return this function. Now, I know this is complicated, but let me show you what that's done. So, this factory only needs to be called once. This factory actually makes the function, and it bakes the entity context into it. And we can see that in practice over here. We can see this. We're going to now do that factory here. We're going to do constant we're going to do set pick feedback equals make set pick feedback, and we're going to pass the entities here. And now we're going to pass the function around. So now this function is back down to that. All right? So let me just recap, because I know this is complicated because we got a lot of nesting going on here. We have a function, a factory created function. This allows us to make this use case on start, on mount, when we run main, whatever. We make it once. It allows us to bake in that entity context right away. Now, whenever whoever uses this, we don't know who's going to use this use case, they do not need the entity context anymore. They are focused just on set pick feedback for this hotspot and this ID, which is really distilling it down to all they care about. They don't care about the React front end. It doesn't care about the entity context. All it cares about is setting some feedback, and we don't need to pollute it with all this other stuff. You guys generally following that idea? It's a little twisty, but I can show you that in practice. The way we get these use cases, let's get this out of here. The way we get these use cases, these functions into React is we use a thing called React context. So I'm going to jump out to the frameworks thing, and I'm going to jump into React. Here's our React context. This is where we define all, we put all the use cases that React front-end components will need to call. So you can see we have edit hotspot, on canvas resize, author slide text. And what you'll see is when we make that app context, we do this once. When we start up rendering, we make the app context, and you'll see this factory function all over in here. We bake in that entity context. And so that when a React function needs to call edit hotspot, for example, they don't need to grab the entity context. That's already taken care of for them. They just need to call edit hotspot, which gets it distilled down to all they need to do. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. There's more documentation about that in the use case documentation. All right, so let's keep charging. Does this pass? Hey, it does pass. Good to go. All right. We've got our first test passed. What's our next test? Okay. It dispatches a state change. Oh man, this is a good one. This is already going to jump us into. Let's come back to this one because that's going to make a little more complication. But I know we need to test it, so I like to do this. When I see a test I need to do, I just write dispatch. I write it down here. So we'll get back to that one. I know that one's going to cause a little muddy. So we're going to get back to that. All right, so now limit the characters to 100. If the characters are above 100, return feedback like that is limited like that. So let's do that. So let's see our test. It returns null if the characters are less than 100. Does it say less than? Let's be limit. If the characters are above, limit are less than or equal to 100. All right. So here we go. Let's see. We're going to go ahead and do this thing. Grab our use case here. Now, feedback. Okay. We need to make a character string that is 100 long. So let's just do, what's a quick way to do that? For loop. Let's start with let feedback equal an empty string. We're going to do a quick for loop. For index equals 0, index is less than 100. We're just going to do, it's going to be a crazy looking thing. We're going to do feedback plus equal an A. So this feedback is just going to be 100 A's in a row. All right.
I would have put a 1, but that's perfect.
Yep. Now we're gonna do look at the return value. So we're checking return. So we're gonna do something like constant return rval is gonna equal set pick feedback hotspot ID and then feedback. All right. We expect rval to be null. I think there's a to be null. There it is. Right on. I'm expecting to pass because we're already doing that. But that'll set us up for the next test when we start doing tests. All right. So, going back to that factory and why we inject the entity challenge or the entity context in the factory, you can already start to see the effect of that as we write test. We just called that use case. We don't have to worry about grabbing that entity context. We did not need to deal with it. It's taken care of. So we're starting to see that reasoning as to why we do that. All right. Now, a lot of times you don't want to put more than one test. You kind of want to keep your tests simple. Because if you make a really complicated test, one of those things fail, it gets hard for other people to figure out, well, what are you doing here? But I'm going to make an argument that this one is kind of like, I kind of want to check, I want to make sure that it flips that flag right at 100, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refactor this, and I'm going to kind of step through this a little bit. We're going to watch this. So I'm going to actually go to 99. We expect it to be null. I'm going to make this into a let because now I'm going to bump this feedback up. We're going to do one more character. I still expect it to be null. Then we're going to do one more. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, are you still expecting it to be null at 99? Because
yeah.
It's still less than...
Right.
It's less than 100. Shouldn't it be not null?
No. So we want feedback. Limit the characters to 100. So if you're up to 100, you're good to go. We don't no validation messages coming back. Soon as you bump above 100, we start saying, you can't go above 100. All right. So feedback. So now, you know what? Now that I write this out, I always try to think about, okay, is someone else going to be able to read this and figure out what's going on? This is starting to feel a little junky. So, you know what? We're not going to do it. We're going to go back to this. Let's get this back to the way it was. And we'll do individual tests because this reads right. Now, let's just do another test. It's fine. It's fine to be verbose on your testing. It's fine to have a lot of testing. This is documentation. Okay, returns a message if the characters are greater than 100. The character, I should say something like the string length is really let's change this, is equal. So we're not actually testing for less, we're testing for equal. We could do another test for less than, but that's fine. Returns greater than. All right, so let's do, this one should be 100. Actually, we could do both. Yeah, well, we'll keep riding. Okay, now we're going to do 101. Now we expect this not to be null. All right, now this one's going to fail. Whoa, wait a second.
Yeah, they all passed because you set it up correctly.
Whoa.
You did not know.
I feel like this should fail. Sometimes tests get a little behind. All right, so this, right now you can see null is hard-coded, essentially. There's no way this is coming back not null. All right, so let's do our test. Okay. Let's do this. Let's just throw it down here. If feedback.length is greater than 100, return, I have a message in here. Oops. All right, so as you guys, it's a weird break. As you guys develop code, you'll develop that moment where things will tickle. You'll start saying, all right, I've seen a couple things right here that throw a flag as a developer. One, this is a magic number, 100. Notice we're using this 100. We're using that same number here that's built into our tests. That seems very, very fragile, right? You can see, hopefully you're seeing that like, ooh, that is there's something wrong there. Another magic thing is this. We're hard coding a string. Should tickle you a little bit. You should be like, that is a warning flag. You should get a little stink off of that. You should be like, that's a little stinky. But we'll let it ride for now. I'm going to add some little notes, because this is how I do my test driven. Every time you get that tickle, you're like, ooh, you see an edge case. You see a way things can go wrong. As a test driven developer, you should write tests to deal with this stuff. I mean, we're covering all the edge cases. We want this thing to be bulletproof. And I can see right now that 100 is a magic number. Message is hard coded. These are my little problems that I'm starting to see that I need to cover with my tests. And I need to deal with these. But for right now, we're going to keep on keeping on. All right. Dispatch state change. All right, so that passed that. Okay, next thing. We know that we're limiting to 100 characters. So there's another test we got to check. When we send this to the entity, are we clamping it to 100 numbers? Or, are we letting more, is this limit to 100 character? Well, let me go back to here. No, we've sent in this super long string of A's. We're the guardians at this point, right? We need to limit that to 100 characters. So what we should not be updating the entity if it's greater than 100, right? We're the guardians. So we're the gatekeeper. So we need to write a test for that. It does not update the entity if the string is greater than 100. So here we go. What we should get here now is we're going to grab this same little bit of test here. Oops, put it in the wrong spot. And now we're going to say, let's grab. Okay, now we're going to do a SPY. This is a good spot for a SPY. I'll show you a SPY. This is a great spot. So we're going to do, we're going to need this pick challenge. We could do a mock, a jest function, or a SPY. We're going to do a jest function on this because we don't really care about we're going to check to make sure it's not called is what we're trying to do. We're going to make sure that, essentially we're going to do this. Pick challenge dot set feedback. We're going to hijack that and turn that into a jest function. So tricky bit here. We've taken this function, and in this test, we have replaced this function with a jest function. And now we can do expect, oops, not export. We expect pick challenge dot set, no, wait a second, pick challenge dot set feedback for hotspot not to be called. And because we injected a jest function, we can do this to be called. So that's what we're looking for. We're expecting, so we don't need this anymore. Wait, yeah, we do. This is our thing. Set. All right, there we go. Let's see, let's get all the way to the bottom. All right, there's our call. It was called with this, so that's good. So now what we need to do is we need to just rearrange this guy. If we do this, then we do that, right? Now we just slip that into there. We get a little check in there. All right, cool. Little refactor, got that going. All right. Dispatch state change. That's the next one. We'll get into these refactors in a second. Okay, dispatching the state change. Let me explain what's going on there. This is a function that gets called when the author is editing. So you're thinking, imagine this. The author is typing in this text to set that. Every time they add a character, it's doing it. All right? This is a state change. There is something new that can be saved. They have edited, right? Every time the author does something that we can save, we have to do this call called dispatch state change. Now, when you see that word dispatch, that's a key. That this is something that this app is sending to the host. So remember, we have an app that's a plugin. The app plugs into the host. In our development world, the host is the sandbox. When we're published, the host is the player. That is because the state machine, the thing that is controlling that's storing those states and managing the save button, that actually lives in the host. The save button does not exist in the app. That's the host's responsibility to handle save, to handle cancel, all that state machine stuff. So the app needs to tell the host, hey, there are new changes. And the host is going to use that to set button states, to do what it needs to do. But that's all we're doing is we're not saving the state. We're dispatching and saying, hey, there is a new state available to save. And that's all taken care of for us. We look over here, there's already a use case. We have a use case folder called dispatchers. And there's already a use case in here called dispatch state change. And you can poke around and see what it does, but it's all tested. It's all doing its thing. But ultimately, we need to call this function. That's what we're getting to. We need to dispatch state change. Now, we don't just do the dispatch on our own, because you'll find, actually you'll see it in this thing, and if we get to it, if we have enough time, we're gonna be writing a validator in here too. One more thing this function is going to do is it's going to validate if the state is good. There are rules that will block saving, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But just know that there could be validation, and we centralize that into this particular use case. So anyways, every time the author changes something, we need to dispatch a state change. So I'm going to just do this a little bit awkwardly and show you guys why we're going to do this next move. So we know we need to dispatch the state change, right? We need to call this guy. It's a factory created function again. So we could make this factory. We could do it outside actually. We could do this constant dispatch state change right here. And that's going to equal make dispatch not dispatch handlers, dispatch state change. And it just wants the entities as well. And then, brute force, we do this, right? Okay, that's it. What's the problem here? What did I do wrong? There's no tests. Did I write a test? Or did I add source code without writing a test? Right?
Yeah, the source code for that.
Yep. So, whoops, I lost this. Oh, no. Did I jump out? No, here we go. Sorry. I'm trying to get my... hold on a second. I lost control. Back to grid. There we go. So, notice we're not proving that this is happening. This is a requirement. This is in my card. But if you guys were to submit this pull request, I'm going to look at this thing and I'm going to be like, where's the test for dispatching? How do I know that's happening? How do we know somebody doesn't come along? Another thing I can do that I do often when I'm checking code is I'll come over here and I'll randomly comment out a line of code. And if you've got full test coverage, that should cause something to fail, right? If you don't have full test coverage, I comment out this line of code, you see tests are passing, that's a problem, That either means this line of code is doing nothing important and can be deleted, but now we're no longer satisfying our requirements. The tests prove that we're hitting the requirements. Okay, so we understand. Now, how do I write a test? Right? There's a problem. What literally do I do? I can't get a hold of this. I can't spy on anything. I have nothing to get a hold of. We're in a little bit of a pickle here because I don't, how do I check? Right? This function was created here. And this is a functional component. There's no states. There's no way for me to grab a hold of this thing. So I've got no way to check it. So that's going to explain this weird twist we do where we do a class function. All right. So let me break it out and just hang on for a little bit because we're going to do a big refactor on this guy. We're going to turn it into a class and then we'll get into, and then you'll see why this happens. So let me do this. Let me just write the test. It calls the dispatch state change function. All right. That's what we got to test, but we got to write that test. And this is what we're going to do. So here we go. What we're going to do is I'm going to start down here and I'm going to do this export class. Now, classes, our naming convention is if it's a function, it's a lowercase at the beginning. If it's a class, it's uppercase at the beginning. I think it's camel case. Is that what that's called? So we're going to call this make set pick feedback. And I'm going to add use case, a UC on the end, but just hang on. I'll explain that in a minute. All right. Now we're going to do a constructor. In the constructor, we're going to bring in the entity context. And a little trick I'm going to do. Well, no, we'll do this. We'll do this explicitly. We know we need a pick challenge. So I'm going to do a private pick challenge. And that's a pick challenge, right? And we're going to do this dot pick challenge is going to equal entities.pickChallenge. Now, I'm going to add in public. I'm not going to make this private. This is the twist we do. We're going to call this dispatch, D-I-S-P-A-T, state change. And that is a void function. Now, we're going to set that up. This dot dispatch equals make dispatch state change entity context. All right, what happened? Oh, I forgot the equal sign.
You're missing an equal sign.
There we go. Yep, there we go. All right, so now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to make a public thing. I'm going to actually do dispatch. And I know no, not dispatch. We're going to do set pick feedback. We're going to actually just grab this. Let me just grab all of this and put it in here. So now we're going to do a this. Change this around. And we're going to do a this. All right. So what I've done is I've taken this function and I've slipped it into a class that's exposed right here. There's the use case. And the only reason I've done this is so that for testing purposes only, right? There's no other reason for this. So now over here, what I can do is we can do this. We can do constant set pick feedback UC is going to be new make set feedback UC entities. And now this use case is actually not that one. This dispatch, or there we go. Now we're getting all hooked back up again. And now I have access. I have a reference to this. So I can do this. I can do constant mock. I can mock the dispatch. Dispatch state change equals a jest function. And I can inject that. Set pick feedback UC dot this is a mock dispatch state change. A lot of fancy stuff going on. But now I can return that. And now I can test that. Right? That is the whole point of this. So now we do this. And this time, we're going to do set pick feedback. Yep. Mock. Wait, didn't I return it? No. We need to return this one. We're going to return our mock function. All right. So now we got our mock, and now we can do this. We're going to do the set feedback. Let's just grab one of these ones where we're not messing with the strings. Set feedback, and now we expect this guy to get called. All right. A lot of twists and turns there. You might think, well, that's a lot of work. But now, let's see, did it pass? Let's check that first. Oh, no. 3 fails. Okay, let's see what's going on. Okay, so this is why we do tests, because now we've got a bunch of fails, 3 fails. So my refactor broke something. But we know we don't need to rewrite tests. These tests are the way they're supposed to be. So that means there's something wrong in our code. So let's see what's going on. So I'll start. I like to boil it back. So here's another little trick you could do. If you do only, it'll just do that one test. And you don't have to worry about it. So let's see if the first test pass. No. All right. Can I read properties undefined? Okay. Okay, here we go. This is a good one. This needs to be an arrow function. So, not getting too deep into arrow functions because essentially they define the this. So because we're using this in here, we have to use an arrow function. So there we go. Let's undo the only. I'm going to guess we pass now. All our tests should pass. Yeah, go ahead.
Never mind. My point was fruitless. I apologize.
Okay, so we did all that twisting and turning to make it so we can check to dispatch state change. And now we're going to get into why. I mean, not only do we need to prove that to begin with, we need to do a little logic around that. All right, I'm going to show you another test. Should we dispatch state change if someone does this a bunch of times and there's actually no change? We should check to see. You know, we can imagine a situation where someone is sending in this set pick feedback over and over again with the same text, right? There's not really a state change. It's, you know, something's going on. I don't know what's going on, but let's write that test. It does not dispatch if there is no change. Okay, so let's figure out what would that test look like. We're going to grab this thing. Actually, we're going to just grab all this stuff. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set it once. All right, so we set it there. Now let's grab our mock dispatch state change and mock clear it. So we're going to reset that function to say, okay, we're back to 0. Now let's call this thing a bunch of times. Right? So we've called it over and over again, but we expect this not to be called. We expect to have some logic in there that's going to say, is there really a change? Let's see if there's really a change. So let's write that in here. So what we'll do, we'll write that right here. Okay, so let's get the feedback first. So we're going to do this constant. Current feedback is pick challenge dot get feedback for hotspot with the hotspot ID. And if current feedback is equal to the feedback we're being passed in, we're out of here. Okay. Wait, there we go. Yep. Okay. Good. Makes sense? Everybody clear on that one? All right, how much time we got left?
7 minutes.
Okay, so we're gonna skip working on the magic numbers and the hard-coded stuff. I'll show you. I'll make some videos maybe, and we'll talk. I'll show you guys how we get around that. But let me do one more thing real quick. Back to the outside world. We start thinking about React context. Where is this one at? Let's go back to our React context. We start thinking about the outside users of this use case. We know we need to do this, create this, like we're creating a use case that's called this, and then we have to pull out this function. That's weird and messy to everybody else. It only applies, you only understand why you're doing that in the test function. So we're going to do one more thing to make the life easier for everybody outside, right? We're going to do this. We're going to go back to this export function, make set pick feedback, passing in the entity context, because this is what the outside world kind of expects. They're like, this is the pattern we use. Why do we have to do this class and all that stuff when it doesn't even matter? And then we do this. We do constant UC is equal to new, make set feedback UC entities, and then we return the UC dot set feedback. All right. We don't test this. We could if we wanted. This, all it's doing is making the world easier for everybody else who doesn't have to deal with checking if we're calling, doesn't have to write tests for this. But notice we're using this. We're returning this very function. And this is all being tested. Okay, last thing. All right, so we've written this code. We've satisfied. We'll ignore these problems we've identified about magic numbers and hard-coded. Your job is not quite done. What you can do now is, as a developer, here's what I do. I finished all my requirements. My tests are completed. I close this down. I keep my tests running. And I take a fresh look at this code. Because the code you write while fixing and solving and doing this is probably not readable. It's probably not elegant. It's not like beautiful to go back and look at. Now we take a fresh look at this piece of code. all our tests are running. So we know we can clean this up. We can refactor this thing. And as long as the tests pass, we are good to go. So let's take a fresh look at this. All right, I see some things. Okay. Pick challenge. Yeah, this is all looking good. Here's the thing I see right away. I've got these return null. I've got this kind of deeply nested. You know, we're 3 indentations in at this point. That's not great. Indentations are hard to read. We try to limit indentations. So let's do it this way. Here's a way we can refactor this. If the feedback, we can flip this around. If feedback length is greater than 100, oh, we've already got it right here. If this is greater than 100, we can return. We actually don't even need to do an else after that because we're returning. We're out, right? So we can take this. We've dropped in 1 level of indentation. All right. We got 2 returns going on here. Let's see. Can we, I don't necessarily like that. This feels a little like we could do this a little bit different. Here's what we could do. If we can flip this around. If feedback is not equal, we do this and we do this, right? There. That's a lot cleaner. Now we're boiled down to 1 return down here. You can see this code. We've taken our moment. We've looked at it again. And we see, all right, yeah, okay. Maybe, this might be a moment to look at, is this a good word? Current feedback? Yeah, I think that's a good word. Yeah. So all of our tests, we can hit save again one more time. All of our tests still pass. We did not break anything. We just took a minute and we cleaned it up and re-looked at it and took a fresh look and be like, does this read well? All right. That's the last step of this one. Also notice how this use case is bulletproof. It is set up. It's tested. If you guys can assume, if we're all good developers, we can depend on each other. And I'm going to assume that you guys wrote tests for all the thing you want. And what that gives me the freedom to do is if let's say I'm handed this piece of code and I find something confusing, I find a word that I'm like, you know what? That word is confusing. You guys can fix it. So like I hand this off to Philip and Philip says, you know what? Current feedback, I find that confusing. Let's just say, let's rename this to existing feedback. That makes more sense to me. I can do that. I can check my tests and I know everything is still good. So it allows us each to take turns refactoring or cleaning up each other's code, because the way I think about things is probably going to be different than the way you guys think about things. And you might see a thing to be like, you know what? We should bust this out into its own function. You guys should do that. As you come across code, there's this Boy Scout saying, leave it cleaner than you found it, or leave it better than you found it. That is what we're doing. We're always cleaning up. We're always making things cleaner than we found it. All right. Hey, right on time. There you go. There is a use case. This is actually this weird trick we do with class function is one of the more complicated use cases. Let me just point out there are other use cases that do include state. And so you're going to see these a lot when they're related to mouse input or like a controller input. So this one, for example, is a complicated use case. You'll see it's uppercase, pan scene root. This is what happens when you use your mouse and you click on the scene and you drag and you let up and that whole, you pan the scene around. That is that whole verb, that whole action. It's not just a singular event. There's a press, there's a drag. It takes moments. Things, render cycles happen. Seconds go by. There's a release. That's an indicator that you're probably going to be dealing with a class-based use case. So this is a class-based use case that has multiple function in it. It's not boiled down into a factory. The controller comes in and initializes it, does pan, it maintains some states, stuff like that. So you'll run into use cases that are functional. That's what we just built. Most of them are functional. They're a verb, they do something, and we're done. But you'll also run into use cases where they're classes, where it takes a duration to complete this. So you'll see that as well. All right, guys. Any questions?